On a quiet August morning in 2025, the mountains of southeastern Alaska did something no instrument had predicted. A wall of rock, millions of tons of it, simply let go. In the span of a few heartbeats, it hit the water below with a force so violent that seismographs on the other side of the planet shook, and what came next was something most people believe only happens in disaster films. A wave nearly 1,600 feet tall exploded through Tracy Arm Fjord, and almost nobody saw it coming. To understand just how staggering that number is, consider this. The tallest skyscraper in the United States stands just over 1,700 feet. The wave that tore through Tracy Arm that morning was taller than almost every man-made structure on Earth. Only a small handful of buildings have ever reached that height. The force of the collapse didn't just move water, it moved the ground itself. Seismic sensors across North America, Europe, and Asia registered the event simultaneously. In the first confusing minutes, several monitoring stations flagged it as an earthquake. But the Earth hadn't moved. No fault line had slipped. No tectonic plates had shifted. The mountain simply fell. And then the fjord refused to calm down. For days after the collapse, massive waves continued surging back and forth through the water, bouncing off the rock walls like water in a shaken bottle. Scientists call this a seiche, a standing wave that keeps oscillating inside an enclosed body of water long after the initial event. The fjord had become a trap, and anything inside it would have had no way out. But here's the part that changes everything. Deep inside Tracy Arm, a glacier called the South Sawyer had been doing what glaciers across the world are now doing, retreating. For years, rising temperatures had been pushing it further and further back into the fjord. What most people don't realize is that a glacier doesn't just fill a valley, it holds it together. The ice acts as a kind of internal skeleton for the mountain walls surrounding it, pressing outward, filling cracks, keeping the rock under pressure. When the South Sawyer pulled back past a critical point, the mountainside lost that support almost entirely. Cracks that had been sealed for centuries began to open. Meltwater seeped deep into the rock. Gravity, patient as ever, did the rest. On the morning of August 10th, the slope gave way. Now, here is the detail that stops you cold. Cruise ships were scheduled to enter Tracy Arm Fjord that same morning. Every week, vessels carry tourists into that narrow channel to see the glaciers, the wildlife, the raw wilderness of Alaska up close. It's one of the most visited fjord routes on Earth. Had the collapse happened just a few hours later, those ships would have been inside the fjord when the wave came. In a space that narrow-walled on both sides, by sheer cliffs, rising thousands of feet, there is nowhere to go, no room to turn, no shallow bay to retreat into. The wave would have arrived faster than any alarm system could have responded. The timing, by pure chance, was the only thing that made this a story of geology instead of catastrophe. A fjord is not simply a bay. It's a long, narrow corridor of water, carved over thousands of years by moving glaciers, compressed between walls of rock that rise almost vertically on both sides. When millions of tons of mountain fell into that corridor, the energy from the impact had nowhere to spread. In an open ocean, a collapse like this would have sent waves radiating outward in every direction, losing force as they expanded. But inside a fjord, the walls won't let that happen. The energy was squeezed, focused, and amplified, firing like a pressure wave down a pipe. Because there had been no earthquake, no obvious trigger, scientists had to work backward. They combed through satellite imagery taken in the months before the collapse. They analyzed radar scans of the glacier and the surrounding rock. They mapped every subtle shift in the mountain's surface, sometimes measured in millimeters, recorded over years. What they found was alarming. The South Sawyer Glacier had been shrinking for decades, but in the spring of 2025, alone, in just a few months, it retreated by around 1,600 feet. Half a kilometer of ice, gone in a single season. And Tracy Arm is not an isolated case. Across Alaska, Greenland, Norway, Patagonia, And the Himalayas, steep valley walls are losing the glaciers that have stabilized them for thousands of years. Slopes that have stood without incident throughout recorded human history are quietly developing the same fractures, the same weaknesses, the same slow-motion countdown. The same fjords now at risk are among the most visited places on Earth. Cruise routes thread through them every season. Ports, mining operations, oil facilities, and coastal settlements have grown up in places that were once considered too wild to inhabit. The risk of any single landslide hitting a ship on any given day is still low, but the number of people in these zones is rising, and the stability of the mountains above them is falling. Those two curves are moving in opposite directions. To understand how bad it can get, you have to go back to a night in July 1958 at a place called Lituya Bay. A massive earthquake struck the region late in the evening. The ground shook so violently that an entire section of the mountain above the bay broke loose. Around 40 million cubic yards of rock dropped nearly 3,000 feet straight into the water. The wave that followed swept up the opposite slope, stripping away every tree, every layer of soil, every living thing, all the way up to 1,720 feet above sea level. To this day, it is the largest wave ever measured in recorded history. Lituya Bay had been shaped by geology itself for exactly this kind of destruction. A major fault line runs directly beneath it. Glaciers had carved the bay into a narrow, elongated channel, almost perfectly sealed on three sides by sheer mountain walls. When that wall of rock hit the water, the energy had nowhere to go but forward. The bay acted like a cannon barrel. The wave wasn't just created, it was launched. Several fishing boats were anchored inside that night. 2 were hit with full force and vanished within seconds. A third was lifted completely off the water and carried over a forested spit of land. The people aboard did not survive the landing. A handful of others, anchored in slightly more sheltered positions, survived by margins measured in yards. 5 people lost their lives in total. Given the hour and the remoteness, it could have been far worse. But people had known something was wrong with Lituya Bay long before 1958. In 1786, a French explorer named Jean-François de Laperouse became the first European to sail into the bay. He was mapping the Alaskan coastline, meticulous and methodical, recording everything he observed, and what he saw troubled him immediately. The forests along the mountainsides didn't thin out gradually the way forests normally do. They stopped sharply. Abruptly, a clean horizontal line cut across the slopes as though trimmed with a blade. Below it, ancient trees. Above it, bare rock. He didn't know what had caused it, but something clearly had. He sent 3 small boats toward the narrow entrance to survey the water depth, a routine task. The weather was calm, the sky clear. But inside the fjord, the currents were violent and unpredictable in ways the open ocean gave no warning of. 2 boats were capsized and pulled under. 26 men drowned. Their bodies were never recovered. The only island in the bay was later named Cenotaph from the Greek for an empty tomb built in memory of someone whose body was never found. The name carried more meaning than even Laperouse could have imagined. In 1899, an earthquake sent another wave crashing through, destroying a settlement and taking 5 more lives. In 1936, another collapse, another surge, another erasure, and then 1,958. And now, in 2025, a fjord just a few hundred miles away generated the second largest wave of its kind ever recorded without a single earthquake, without any conventional warning, driven almost entirely by a glacier that had quietly retreated past the point of no return. These places have always been dangerous. What is changing is how many people are now inside them, and how much faster the ice that kept the mountains standing is disappearing. The wave that moved through Tracy Arm touched nothing built by human hands. The ships arrived after the water had settled. But the mountain that fell that morning is not the only one being held together by ice that is running out. Somewhere in the fjords of Alaska, the next slope is already cracking. We just don't know which one yet.